So welcome back to Grief is the Word. So a series of mini interviews and videos that I'm recording in association with National Grief Awareness Week. And today we're going to talk about supporting young people, children and young people, as you know, the theme that's laid out by the Good Grief Trust. I think it's a fantastic theme. And I'm joined here today by Neil Campbell, who is a bereavement counsellor. Welcome back, Neil, because you joined us on the men's grief interview as well, so it's good to have you back here. And also Karen Sutton, who is a fellow grief and loss coach, albeit working in a different area to myself and has a different range of expertise. So I'm really pleased that you're able to join me here, Karen, so thank you. Actually, it's really, it was unplanned, but it turns out that today marks the start of Children's Grief Awareness Week, which is something I've just picked up on in the last couple of days. And according to some of their stats, actually, it says that 44,000 children in the UK annually are bereaved. And that, obviously, with the current situation, is expected to rise as well. And that kind of works out at something like one child in every classroom, which is quite a sobering statistic, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And do you know what I think? When my husband died, I became very aware, actually, of how many parents died young, leaving young children behind, and the statistics are far greater than I ever imagined. It's not something you particularly think about, is it? But when you're thrown into that world and you're exposed to it, it's actually really quite frightening. And people don't have the skills and the resources to support these children. There's so many of them out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Neil, this is an area for you that you have a lot of experience in as well. And just wondering, just do those kind of statistics kind of ring true for you? Is that, you know...
Well, I think not only do they ring true, but I think one of the sad things for me is that I think that's probably a conservative estimate.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you look at a typical classroom in a primary school, my other half is a primary school business manager, large primary school, and they've had about 4 or 5 parental deaths in the school just in the last 12 months. And we also had the death of a teacher, which has as big an impact, I think, sometimes on young children, particularly primary school age as well. But I think the sad thing for me is, at the moment, is that at a time when we need to be offering more support, the schools are going back in their support mainly through financial issues. You know, if we go back about 6 or 7 years, I can remember some of the placement students when I used to have counselling contracts with local NHS trusts and local councils. And some of the counsellors coming in were doing a placement with me and then going off and working in a school without much training, I should say, which was a bit worrying at the time. But most schools had a counsellor. Now, you'll be lucky to find a school with a counsellor, certainly in the northeast, because obviously if finances are cut back, the first 2 things that go are things like counselling and special needs.
Yeah.
And so I think we're probably in a worse scenario with supporting bereaved people, supporting bereaved children and young people, than we have been for some time.
Yeah, and also obviously this year there's the added factor of the disruption in schools and education anyway. You know, the Children's Grief Awareness Week campaign is focused on isolation. That's the theme for this year, because of course, you know, the impact of the pandemic means that children are more kind of isolated, aren't they, at home, and have been away for great periods of time, really, from that, I suppose, a sense of normality as well, and, you know, being in the setting that they're so used to, being around their peers and friends and things.
Yeah, and I think you know, the biggest sort of bit of advice that I got when my husband died was keep life as normal as you can for your children. You know, my husband died on the Sunday, and they went into school as normal on the Monday, and we continued with that, and they kept going, and they did everything. They went to all their clubs, and you've got to try and retain as much normality in their lives as you can when it's kind of been thrown apart. And as you say, how do you do that when there's a global pandemic going on and everything's shutting down and support services aren't there, and schools have been closed for such a long time? The impact on children and their mental health is huge, and it's frightening. And I think, you know, it's not going to stop here either. It's going to continue. And it worries me. It does worry me that they're not getting what they need.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think 2021 is going to be a very, very tricky year for both adults and young persons' mental and emotional health. I think we're going to have sadly a tsunami of mental health problems if and when we actually come out of this all together as well. And I certainly agree with you, Karen. I think that, you know, in periods like that, routine and structure is still essential. But it's a very tricky balance, because you've got to have routine and structure, but at the same time give them room when they want to actually grieve for their loss, because and I think this is where still a lot of adults and a lot of teachers still don't get it, is that children and young people grieve as intensely and fully as adults. They just do it in different ways. And part of the different ways is that they can tend to dot in and out. And so, you know, they can have almost like a whole week of where you think, oh gosh, they're back to normal, whatever that is. And so the teachers think, oh well, they're through that, they're just taking a breather. You know, they're just taking a break from it. But I think that quite often adults, and particularly in schools, teachers, head teachers, etc., misunderstand and misinterpret bereaved children's behaviour.
Yeah. Is that something you experienced, Karen, for yourself? Like, did you have a sense of, okay, they are grieving and they're just grieving differently, or were there times where you kind of thought, oh, I'm not actually sure what's happening here, or, you know?
Yeah. It's interesting, actually, because Winston's Wish, the childhood bereavement charity, referred to it as puddle jumping.
Yeah.
You know, they kind of they jump in and out of puddles, and 1 minute that, you know, they're playing perfectly well, they're fine, they're happy, they're you think, oh, this is great, and then the next they crumble, and their behaviour becomes really quite extreme, and you don't know what to do with that. And you know, it's like, are they grieving? Is this related to the death of their parent, or are they just being a child and playing up and being naughty? And how do you figure that out? You know, it leaves you with a lot of unanswered questions. You're already in a bad place yourself, and questioning everything that you do. And trying to support your children when you have no idea. I mean, you know, grief is horrendous, isn't it? It throws us into an unknown world that we don't understand, and we're trying to make sense of our own thoughts, feelings, emotions. And we can't express that, and we can't understand it. So trying to, you know, get a child to tell you how they're feeling and what's going on and what they need is nigh on impossible. You have to almost learn to trust your instincts, and what the school actually did for my children, which I thought was wonderful. They gave them a little picture card of a house, and they said to them, if you're ever feeling funny and you want to go home, you don't have to say anything, just get the picture and show me the picture, and I'll phone your mum and I'll come and get her, and I'll phone her, she'll come and get you. And that was on it, that I think actually only one of my daughters ever used it once. But even just knowing that they had that security, they didn't have to go and talk to anyone, they didn't have to say anything, they could just show that picture, and they could go home and feel safe. And you're right, Neil, you know, they also need that space to grieve and feel what they're feeling, and know that it's okay, because it's a scary world. And I think sometimes we as parents want to protect our children and not show them how horrible it is and how sad we're feeling. But actually, by holding that back and trying to act normal, you're making them feel that that's what they have to do as well, and they have to be allowed to grieve and show their emotions, and that often comes out in anger and frustration and playing up. So it's finding ways of calming them down, and that's tricky. I've battled with that for a long time, actually.
I think as well, it's finding ways to help them express their grief, because, you know, with the greatest respect, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, children and even young people into teenage years are still emotionally immature. In other words, you can't start sitting down like an adult and say, oh, tell me about bitterness and resentment, because, you know, they just won't understand those words, particularly the young ones. I mean, if you're working with an 8 or 9 or 10-year-old. So I think it's actually harder to work. It's hard work, lovely work, but it's hard work working, because you have to find, as my old supervisor said, and I've adopted that for a short training course I do for teachers, it's helping children find their metaphor for their grief. In other words, finding a medium through which they can express their grief, whether that's drawing, playing in stand tray, doing a memory jar, putting together their own little memory box, or one of the things I love doing, which is reading fictional books, bibliotherapy for bereaved children and young people, helping them find a method. The problem is that schools haven't got time to do that. And the number of people actually working with bereaved children, when you think about it, is absolutely minute still. Very, very few people are prepared to do that, because, you know, and I mean, teachers, and I mean, I remember the first training course I did with some teachers locally here, and we were doing the sand tray exercise. And with teachers, they were, pardon me, I don't suppose either of you being a teacher, so yeah, right, okay. The teachers tend to want to know everything, and, you know, why does this and what is that, etc. And trying to get teachers, no, you're not asking why, etc. You're just, it's almost like they're accompanying the bereaved child while they're doing the exercise. And honestly, I'm watching them, some of them you think, well, having to hold their tongue to stop them asking the questions as well. Because obviously, you know, it takes a lot of patience just to work, because you can sit with a bereaved child and be in total silence for about an hour watching them play in a sand tray or do a memory game together, and probably they might say about 4 words to you, but that's what it is.
Yeah, and presumably there are also differences in, you know, the age ranges of children and how they respond to loss as well. So we've talked very much, I suppose, about younger children, but then you've got now the category is tweens, isn't it? Like that sort of 10, 11, 12, and then you've got early teen years, and also young adults as well. So there must be differences in how they respond.
Well, I think today's 11 or 12-year-old is very much more street savvy than when I was 11 or 12, I think, because of society. So I think once you get to about 13, I mean, I'm doing some work with a couple of, well, one 15 and one 16 for a local organisation. One of my specialities who are bereaved by suicide. And in particular, they come from a social group where 4, not all at the same school, but 4 young people of 15 to 16 committed suicide over a 9-month period in the same group. And working with one of them, she's like a very young adult. I mean, she is incredibly street savvy. So you are able to actually have almost like a fairly orthodox counselling session with it as well. So I think, you know, once they get to the 12 or 13, they're a bit more savvy. Yeah,
I also think there is perhaps a tendency to kind of forget that age group as well, though. They're not, you know, quite adults yet. And I'm just drawing on my own experience, actually, of when we, you know, I've got a younger sister who's 4 years younger, and when we lost our parents, we lost our mum, really, it was quite traumatic because it was a sudden death. And I mean, she was 19, which, you know, you could say, well, that's, you know, it's adulthood, really. But I think looking back now, I realise that she was still relatively young and did have very different struggles to what I did. I was 25. And so there was a definite, I don't know, there's something I think now looking back that she could have benefited from in terms of having that, you know, additional support that's much more geared around young people.
Yeah, do you know? And I think as well, as you grow and go through the different stages of life, and you know, travel through the ages, your grief changes as well, doesn't it? Because you do carry it with you, and it's you know, at the moment that it happens, it's raw and it's painful and it affects you in a huge way, but you know, as you go through different stages in your life, it comes back in different ways, and it's acknowledging that, I think, as well. And there's also, I think, sometimes a belief around people getting support when it's, you know, tied to bereavement of, well, what's the point, because it can't change anything and it can't bring that person back. And a lot of people shy away from getting support, and children as well, teenagers, young adults, almost like, well, what can you do for me, how can you help? And it's almost, it's validating what you feel, isn't it? And it's normalizing it, and it's just talking, because so much goes on in your head, doesn't it, when you lose someone you love, and you have so many thoughts and emotions that aren't normal to you because you haven't had them before, and you keep them all inside, and then you feel this shame around them, don't you? You think, oh, I shouldn't be thinking that, I shouldn't be feeling that, that's not normal. But by talking to someone and just someone going, that's okay, you're allowed to feel that, that's normal, it just makes you it reduces that shame, that the guilt that you carry and the heaviness, and just frees you from all that negativity surrounding it, you know.
Yeah, and I guess young people will need a different perhaps a different space or a different environment to feel able to kind of say some of that stuff or get some of that stuff out in terms of what's going on for them.
Yeah, and because they might not want to share it with other adults, you know, parents or siblings, you know, they might, again, because of the shame, sometimes having a neutral person, giving them that safe, non-judgmental space to express themselves in however they want to do that. Really,
and I think we have to remember is that bereaved children inside any family, they are aping and imitating the adults in the family, and they're also imitating and aping adults in general in society. And you know, I go back to a point that I visited many times. We did on the men's brief, and that is, our society needs to have a really good stock take of how we look at grief and the words and the vocabulary that we use, you know, because we are still using time will heal and moving on and stuff like that. And actually, I think we fail to realise that children are picking up on that, because if the adults in their parents and at school, etc., are using that kind of approach, they are going to pick up from that. And so, and they'll pick up from the stoical men that are not giving in, and women who are not expressing their grief. So they'll pick up from that, and hence, as Karen says, they need somebody that's a little bit neutral. But I think one thing I've discovered, you know, I've been doing, sounds awful, like doing death and grief, but I've been doing bereavement and grief for about 20 years. And one of the things I've noticed from adult counsellors is that quite often there is unaddressed grief from a childhood loss. And the combination of my own experience with clients, and obviously as one designs courses and researches, etc., it is quite clear that if we don't allow bereaved children and young people to express their grief at that time, and it gets better, they are going to have major problems, not only with adult grief, but also relationships as well. You know, quite a lot of people that I've had in counselling with relationship problems, we can probably track back to unaddressed grief from times gone by. And as you know, Louise, I said in the last one, I suppose I could use myself as a personal example, because we lived in a house all together. I lost my grandfather and father when I was 13 and 14. And then after about 2 weeks at home for the funeral, back to boarding school, and both they and their loss and my experience were never ever discussed again. And then when I came home, my mother and grandmother were too busy running the business to try and keep everything on their heads. And when I hit problems in my mid-30s, etc., that's why I went into counselling, that to me is proof that if we don't help them at the time, then unfortunately we are saving up, unfortunately, a lot of pain and grief for them later on.
Yeah, I mean, Karen, so how old were your children when they lost their dad?
So they were 9 and 5 at the time, and that was 4 years ago. So again, it was talking to them at different levels as well, for their understanding, and kind of trying to figure out what they needed from me in terms of support. And it was interesting actually, because they both responded in very, very different ways. My eldest almost kind of just shut off, didn't really ever want to discuss anything. When I told her dad had died, she cried her heart out. She was broken. But even to this day, she's never cried since or said, I really miss my dad, it really hurts, it's horrible. She's never expressed anything like that. But my youngest, who was 5, she's very open, very vocal. She's got very upset at times, lost her temper, frustrated that her dad had died, will say she misses him, and has gone on to worry about obviously her death, my death, and death in general. So they've both sort of challenged me in terms of how they responded to their grief and trying to support them through that. It's tough because, like you say, Neil, you don't want them to carry this heavily through life, that it has a negative impact on their lives as adults and relationships. I don't want that. But you can't force a child to talk to you. You can't. So I've had to just give her that space. I've talked to her about how I feel. I've never hidden anything from her. I've let her listen to conversations that I have with people about how I feel. She's been there with her sister, when she's been upset, and I've talked to her, and I often check in with her. But if I say to her, directly, I might be driving in the car, or I try not to eyeball her, sort of face to face, because I think that's a bit intimidating. But just having a conversation, naturally, are you okay? Do you miss your dad? Are you struggling with anything? But you can almost see her like, yeah, I'm fine. No, I'm good. Why are you asking me? And that the barriers go up a little bit. But I just think if I just keep letting her know that I'm here, and she can talk to me, and trying to normalize. And obviously she sees what I do. I'm on social media, and she sees everything I put out there. So I hope that it is enough, but you do question yourself, and you do worry about it.
To be honest, Karen, I don't think you can do any more. I think you've done pretty well, actually, considering that. I mean, 9 and 5 are extremely tricky ages. I think everything to deal with that. I mean, you're right, that they are difficult ages. How do they react on anniversary time? Because obviously we've lost something that's about, Father's Day, the birthday, the anniversary, the death. How do they react now?
Yeah, again, my eldest, very unfazed by any of it. I've often said to them, what do you want to do on Daddy's birthday? And my youngest is like, oh, let's get a cake, let's sing happy birthday. And my eldest is always very, I don't mind, whatever, it doesn't matter, I'm not worried. She can be quite flippant about it. And I've always been very conscious, really, not to force them or force something that you feel you should be doing, or that is the right thing to do, when it's not maybe needed. We talk about Simon, my husband, every day. There's pictures up everywhere. I'm very open and very honest about it all. I always ask them if there's anything they need, would they like to do anything, and and to be honest, that they don't seem to feel the need to acknowledge that the days in any way, that they're quite happy as it seems to carry on. I'm thinking in time that will change, and as they get older, maybe more questions will be asked and that they'll want more from it. But I just go with it each time and try and sense the mood. Don't force anything. You know, on the day he died, I acknowledge it, but we don't particularly do anything, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think obviously you're well prepared for the future, because I think what if children lose somebody really close to them, they do, you know, I do as well. I have them. We revisit the loss of somebody close to us at very, very special times. So things like our 18th birthday, 21st birthday, maybe going off to university, getting our degree, getting engaged, getting married, that kind of thing. And I think later on, they will probably revisit it then, and who knows, you know, how to be then. I think what's fantastic listening to that is that you're talking about it, because I am a huge advocate of the 2 R's, reminiscing and remembering, because I think we have to do that rather than not talk about it. So I actually think we grow closer to our loved ones after the death. They're still part of the family, you know, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I think that is so important, and put that person on a pedestal and remember them as this perfect a person that existed. You know, I also talk about Simon for, you know, his grumpiness and his you know, the strict that he had with the children, and you know that, you know, if the kids leave a light on in the house, it'd be like, oh God, your dad would be going mad, he'd kill you for doing that. It was, you know, because I don't want them to almost idealize him in their mind, so that no one else can ever live up to those standards that they've created in their own mind. You know, he was human, he was normal, he was grumpy, he was a pain, and he was brilliant, you know. So I think I try and have a balance between remembering the good and the not so good, because it's not all good, right?
Yeah.
I think that's good, because, you know, sometimes children can make a saint out of a person that has died. You know, I had the opposite. My parents' marriage was fairly toxic. He had a drink problem, and I think part of the problem after I came home from school and went to university is that I don't think that my mother ever said a kind word about my father for the next almost the next 10, 15 years. Which was totally the other way. He was almost like demonized instead of being saint. Yeah. And when I look back on it, you know, he wasn't the best of people. He certainly wasn't a good husband, that's for sure. And he had a lot of problems, but at the same time, he was also my father and had a lot of good things as well. And I think it's about getting that balance. Again, you're back there, Karen, to balance, I think, which is absolutely right for children. Absolutely.
Yeah. So what else do you think is helpful for children then and young people?
Oh, God. Well, a lot of the stuff that Karen's doing is with her own children.
If you were to pick one thing that, you know, you could sort of perhaps, I guess, say to somebody right now, you know, if they were sort of struggling or not sure what to do, like what would that one thing be?
I think for me, I think be honest with your children. You know, we have, as parents, we want to protect them. We want to soften things. We want to make it all okay. You know, children have just a wonderful little bubble that they live in, don't they? And they don't understand the big wide world and the horrible things that go on in it, and that innocence. And you want to retain that. So we do try and soften it, and we try not to give them the whole truth, and we use words that maybe don't sound quite so harsh, and if they ask questions, we want to promise them things. We want to make sure everything's going to be okay for them. And I think my big learning in all of this is be clear, be honest, don't make false promises. You know, your children are going to say to you, What happens when you die? Are you going to die? And naturally you want to go, no, of course I'm not. I'm never going to leave you. I'm going to be here forever. But you can't make those promises, you know, and you can't tell them that they're never going to die. So it's a natural life cycle, isn't it? Everything that lives dies. And what you can do is say that I am going to do my absolute best to live until I'm 101 years old, and I'm going to see you grow up and have grandchildren, and I want to share all that with you. You know, because you're reassuring them that that's what you want and that's what you're aiming for, but you're not making promises that you can't keep. You know, you be careful with your words and what you're saying. The one thing I remember a friend of mine always used to say about Simon passing away. You know, people say that, don't they? Passing away. And my youngest daughter Ella, she felt unwell one day, and you know they go grey, and I said, "Oh, Ella, lie down and get your legs up. I think you're going to pass out." She went into blind panic. Oh my God, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I said, no, darling. But she had, because people use the term passing away, she couldn't differentiate between passing out and passing away. And she thought I was telling her she was going to die. And so, you know, at the time I just had to calm her down. But afterwards I had to sit down and explain, you know, that's a term people use when someone's died. Be clear. They've died. They haven't gone to sleep. Don't give them false hope. They're not going to wake up. You know, passing away, sometimes they might think that that's passing out and that they're going to come back. It's be honest, be truthful, give them that honesty. That's I think my biggest thing.
Yeah, it's really fantastic words of wisdom there, Karen. I think.
I would certainly agree with the honesty, simple honesty, because we are. As adults, I think we use a lot of euphemisms that are so unhelpful to children. I mean, I remember one young boy was told that his nana had passed away in her sleep, and for the next week, until they actually tried to sort him out, he refused to go to sleep. He was up. He was literally staying in bed, putting matchsticks under his eyelids just to keep himself awake, because he thought, if I go to sleep, maybe I'll go too. Maybe I'll die too. And then just saying, oh, they went into hospital and then they died. And you'll not get that child going into hospital for anything at all, because they think if they go into hospital. So, you know, the words that we use, and a lot of people use, we be careful. I think we've got to be honest, and keeping it simple and honest. And I think, as well as I would like to see much more people trained to support bereaved children and young people, because I think it is a huge gap in the caring services. And my message to schools is buy this back in, you know, because at the end of the day, the one thing that we know, yes, there'll be a lot of mental health problems in schools, but one thing that we can say is all those children, every single classroom is going to have a bereavement, and probably more than the one bereavement. So if there's any form of counselling, support, or coaching that the schools should have, it should be buy-in people who are trained in bereavement counselling, because I think that's something every school should be able to access. So.
Yeah. Also, very strong message, Neil. So definitely, you know, and we will put some links below the video as well to some support and resources, and you know, some useful websites and things for people. Thank you both for joining me on this chat. Time's flown by. Could talk to you both all day, but it's been really helpful, and I've learned new stuff as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
No, and very nice to meet you, Karen.
And you, Neil.
Yeah, very nice. And I suppose I mean, I'm not promoting podcasts, by the way. God, I mean, I don't know how people do podcasts, because I set out. My daughter gave me a microphone and said, "Will you stop talking about them and do one?" So I've done 2. I should have done about 5 by now, but how people can get around to doing it. But that second podcast is still out there if people are interested, which is about bibliotherapy for young people, bereaved young people and children. And it contains a list of my recommendation books from 3 years old right up to teenagers in there, if anybody's interested in that.
We'll definitely put the link for that below as well. Thank you, Neil.